important issue. I can't agree more with Julian that certainly the time is now for everybody to get involved in this important issue. And I think it's time for people to become more aware about what's happening in Canada with respect to the politicization of science. I must admit, in looking at my slides for today's talk, I wondered how did I, someone trained in psychology, became an epidemiologist, end up talking about the politicization of science? And I realized the answer is really quite simple. It's that I, like many other scientists before me, really have been forced into this dialogue. Don't get me wrong, I would rather not be talking about this today. I wish that science was playing its role in society, which is informing the development of evidence-based policy. And certainly that's the route we've taken with the evaluation of Insite, is to try and get our results out there, to not just simply fill up the shelves of libraries, but to communicate directly with affected communities and policymakers and other stakeholders. But we hit a wall, and it was an ugly wall, and that's led us to the point that many people before us, whether it's tobacco researchers or climate change researchers, have gone, and that's to really start to speak publicly about the role of politics and its interference in science in Canadian society. I think most commentators agree that the principal role of science is really to advance human understanding. And in my field of study, which is health and medicine, we have this concept called evidence-based medicine, which asserts that really policies should be based upon the best available evidence for all kinds of reasons, for basic health reasons, but to ensure people's basic human right to the highest level of health, but also to ensure the appropriate allocation of precious resources. However, people who are interested in evidence-based policy also acknowledge that there are instances where policymakers may legitimately ignore science on the basis of ethical, moral, political, or economic reasons. However, they also generally agree that in these instances it's essential that policymakers be fully transparent and not resort to deception when they decide not to honor the best available evidence in developing their policies. Here's a definition of the politicization of science that I like. It says, the politicization of science occurs when governments, business, or interest groups use legal or economic pressure to influence the findings of scientific research which differ from the majority view, or importantly, influence the way research is created, disseminated, reported, or interpreted. And I urge you to think about those different processes, those in sort of that chain between the development of science and research and the point at which it influences evidence-based policy. So let's look at a couple of examples. Certainly there's a number of historical examples where governments have engaged in the politicization of science, and one of the most widely studied and discussed instances was certainly during the time of Hitler and the Holocaust. And it's well known that in addition to using science to justify the Nazi regime, Holocaust deniers have also quite recently turned scientific arguments to prove that the Nazi regime could not have used gas chambers to carry out extermination programs against Jews and others. Both the recent Lecter and Rudolph report and Friedrich Paul Berg's paper, The Diesel Gas Chambers, Myth Within a Myth, claim that gas chambers could not have possibly been used to kill people in the manner described by eyewitnesses. Both papers cite experiments, laboratory analyses, chemical compositions, just like many other scientific papers. A lot of attention has also been given to the misrepresentation and politicization of science under Stalin and in the Soviet Union. From the time of Lenin until the dissolution of the USSR in the early 1990s, both science and technology were very much intimately linked to the identity, ideology, and practical functioning of the Soviet state. Along with art and literature, science under Stalin was under strict ideological control. The consequences of ideological pressure were dramatic. The most notable examples being the bourgeois pseudosciences, genetics and cybernetics, And in the most notorious case, Soviet scientists refused to accept the chromosome theory of heredity usually accepted by modern genetics. Claiming their theories corresponded to Marxism, scientists managed to talk Stalin into banning population genetics and several other related fields of biological research, and sadly his decision was not reverted until the 1960s. Scientific progress was further controlled in rather brutal ways by the fact that many scientists were sent to labor camps or executed. They were persecuted for their dissenting views. Sadly, George Bush is keeping some very, very bad company, and there has been a great deal of interest in the Bush administration's misrepresentation and politicization of science. This has recently led to, before I get there, let me just by way of example, note that 1/5 of FDA scientists in a recent report stated that they have been asked for 9 non-scientific reasons to inappropriately exclude or alter technical information or their conclusions in an FDA scientific report. This also led to a report into the scientific integrity and policy making and investigation in the Bush administration of science, and the report says when scientific knowledge has found to be in conflict with its political goals, the administration has opted and manipulated the process which through science enters into its decisions. This is done by placing people who are professionally unqualified or who have clear conflicts of interest in official posts and on scientific advisory committees, by disbanding existing advisory committees, by censoring and suppressing reports by government's own scientists, and by simply not seeking independent scientific advice. Furthermore, in advocating policies that are not scientifically sound, the administration has sometimes misrepresented scientific knowledge and misled the public about the implications of its policies. And I assure you, this is not the rantings of some mad raving left-wing activists. This is actually a petition that's been signed by more than 9,000 scientists, including 49 Nobel laureates and 63 National Medal of Science recipients. There are also many examples of instances where business and industry have really taken quite exceptional measures to interfere with the natural development of evidence-based policy, and one of the most well-documented instances involves the tobacco industry and science around the harms of smoking. As early as the 1950s, English and American epidemiologists produced a wealth of information indicating that smoking led to cancer and also cardiovascular disease. This body of work was followed by very important consensus statements on the topic, including the 1964 Surgeon General's report or the British Royal College of Physicians report on the harms of smoking. The tobacco industry initially responded by employing pseudoscientists to discredit this body of work. Then, when the science was simply too strong for them to dispute, they employed a range of legal tactics to delay the implementation of policies that would restrict sales. And then their latest shot over the bow was to engage in a scientific misrepresentation campaign which underestimated the effects of so-called light cigarettes on the health of smokers. A more recent example that you're all probably aware of is the petroleum industry and global warming. This actually has been described by some commentators as the most successful disinformation campaign since the tobacco industry misled the public about scientific evidence linking smoking to lung cancer. And just by way of illustration, consider this. ExxonMobil alone has given over $16 million from 1998 to 2005 to more than 40 organizations that undertook efforts to undermine the science specific to global warming. And again, like in the case with tobacco, this has led scientists around the world to issue consensus statements, to band together, and come out and say, it's time for the government and industry to stop telling lies and to do something serious about what is considered to be one of the greatest threats to humankind.